Caden West sat hunched over his desk, eyes glued to the sprawling holographic display before him. The glowing symbols and charts of xenobiology, 301 swirled in a chaotic dance, each one a mystery he just couldn't unravel. His mind buzzed with the names of species, each more complex than the last: Xenacrians, Theronians, Vrexians. Alien biology was supposed to be his specialty, his passion. Yet here he was, struggling to remember the basic principles of intergalactic species evolution, a subject that was vital to his degree at the prestigious Galactic University of Traxxas. The university, a towering structure of glass and steel, had always seemed like a dream come true for Caden. He had worked his whole life to be here, the elite of the elite, a human in a galaxy full of species, some more advanced than humanity could ever hope to be. Yet, in this vast sea of knowledge, he was drowning. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, a dull headache building behind his eyes. The final exam for xenobiology was fast approaching, and with it, his sense of dread grew. Professor Aldera, the professor he had once admired from afar, had become the embodiment of everything he feared about this course. Her teaching was unconventional, to say the least. Aldera, an Alari, stood apart from the other professors. Her species was revered for its intellectual prowess and emotional depth, and Aldera was no exception. Tall and ethereal, with silver eyes that seemed to see straight through to the soul, she taught with a grace and authority that left no room for error. Her lectures were mesmerizing, often delving into the deepest reaches of alien culture and biology. Yet for Caden they were a labyrinth of unintelligible concepts, leaving him grasping at straws. Every time he tried to understand the complexity of a new alien species, something would slip through his fingers. It wasn't that he wasn't intelligent. He was, after all, one of the brightest students in the university. But xenobiology felt like a riddle he couldn't solve. He glanced at the clock. Another hour had passed in the library, and he was no closer to understanding the material. The papers in front of him were a blur. He had barely scraped by in the last few assignments, and he couldn't afford another failure. If he didn't pass this exam, everything he had worked for at Traxxas would be in jeopardy. Why is this so hard? He muttered under his breath. He ran a hand through his messy brown hair, a feeling of frustration tightening in his chest. He had come to Galactic University with dreams of unraveling the mysteries of the universe. But now, with the end of the semester closing in, he felt more lost than ever. He had to get it together, but no matter how hard he tried, the material just wouldn't stick. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor as the lecture hall emptied, signaling the end of Professor Aldera's latest lecture. Caden had been so lost in his thoughts that he hadn't even noticed the other students leaving, their voices drifting out the door. He stood up, stretching, and began packing his things into his bag. Just as he was about to leave, he heard a familiar voice. "Caden West, a moment, please." Caden's stomach tightened. He turned slowly to face Professor Aldera, who was standing near the front of the lecture hall. She was watching him with those piercing silver eyes, her expression unreadable. Despite his growing anxiety, he approached her. "Yes, Professor?" he asked, trying to mask his nervousness. Professor Aldera's gaze softened, though only slightly. "I noticed your frustration during the lecture today." She paused, her tone almost gentle. "You've been struggling with the material." Caden's heart sank. He had never been one to shy away from hard work, but he knew the truth. He wasn't getting it. I don't know what to do, Professor." He let out a heavy sigh. "No matter how much I study, I just can't seem to grasp it." Aldera studied him silently for a long moment. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something Caden couldn't quite place. Finally, she spoke. "I can help you, Caden, but there is a condition." Caden blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "A condition?" he asked, trying to make sense of her words. The professor's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable weight in her words. "You must meet me outside of class for a personal project. It will require your full commitment, and in return, I will ensure you pass the exam." Caden was taken aback. "A personal project? What kind of project?" He felt his curiosity spark, but at the same time, a sense of wariness settled in his chest. Althura's eyes glimmered with something almost mysterious. "That, Caden, is something you will find out if you agree to help me." She paused, as if weighing the situation. "Consider it a trade." For a long moment, Caden stood there, unsure of what to do. His mind raced with possibilities. Part of him wanted to refuse, to insist that he could handle the exam on his own. But another part of him, the part that had desperately wanted to pass, the part that had come to Traxxas University with high hopes, urged him to take the chance. Finally, he nodded. "I'll do it. What do I have to do?" Althura's lips curled into the slightest of smiles, though there was something enigmatic about it. "I knew you would. I'll send you the details soon, Caden. Be prepared." As he left the lecture hall, Caden's thoughts were a whirlwind. He had agreed to something he didn't fully understand, but it was the only way out of his academic nightmare. Whatever Professor Althura had planned, he had no choice but to trust her. The condition was something unknown, but Caden knew that he would have to face it head-on. Caden couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As he made his way back to his dormitory, the dim glow of the university's towering spires casting long shadows on the pathway, his thoughts were tangled. Professor Althura's offer had been unexpected, to say the least. A personal project in exchange for passing the exam? It was hard to believe that such a powerful and respected professor would make such a deal, and yet there was no mistaking her. Sincerity. There was something in the way her eyes had glimmered when she spoke, something that told him she wasn't joking. The moment he stepped into his dorm room, Caden threw his bag on the bed and sat heavily at his desk. His room was small, a standard university dorm, but he hardly ever spent time in it anymore. He'd been too consumed by the relentless grind of his studies, trying to understand alien physiology, ancient civilizations, and the complex social structures of the galaxy's various species. It was overwhelming, and now with Professor Althura's offer, he felt as though he was being pulled in two different directions. The holographic display on his desk flickered on, and Caden quickly checked his messages. As he expected, there was a new one from Professor Althura. His heart skipped a beat as he opened it. Subject: your assignment. Follow-up message. Dear Caden, as discussed after class, please meet me in the Alari Cultural Center at 1800 hours tomorrow evening. The task I mentioned will begin there. Please arrive prepared for a unique experience. I expect full commitment to this project, for both your academic success and, perhaps, your personal growth. Best, Professor Althura Caden felt a mix of excitement and unease. The Alari Cultural Center? It was a building on the far side. The campus, known for its historical significance. No one went there unless they were specifically invited by an Alari professor. The thought of entering the center made Caden's pulse race, and the idea of completing some mysterious project was equally thrilling and intimidating. The evening seemed to stretch out before him, each passing hour feeling like a lifetime. As the time drew closer, he changed into something more presentable, trying to shake the strange sense of anticipation building inside him. He knew he was walking into something unknown, and part of him was excited to finally experience something beyond the endless lectures and textbooks. Another part of him, however, was nervous. This wasn't just another academic task. This was personal. And with someone like Professor Althura, he wasn't sure what to expect. The Alari Cultural Center was not like any other building on campus. It stood apart, a fusion of alien architecture and ancient designs, built from a rare, shimmering stone that seemed to absorb the light around it. As Caden approached, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the place, like it held centuries of secrets within its walls. The silver, translucent doors slid open at his approach, and he stepped into the cool, dimly lit interior. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of incense and the faint hum of a soft, otherworldly melody that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The walls were lined with alien artifacts, strange carvings, shimmering stones, and pieces of technology that Caden couldn't even begin to identify. He stood there for a moment, awestruck, before hearing a soft voice call his name. Caden. He turned to see Professor Alvera, standing at the far end of the room, bathed in the soft glow of light from a crystal pedestal. She was even more striking in this setting, her glowing purple skin reflecting the light, her silver eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his heart race. "Come, Caden," she said, her voice low but commanding. "We have much to discuss." Caden followed her as she led him through the room, her movements graceful and purposeful. Every step seemed measured, as if she was walking through something far beyond ordinary space. She stopped in front of a large, intricate stone pedestal at the center of the room. The surface was covered in symbols Caden didn't recognize, glowing, shifting patterns that seemed to pulse with energy. "This," she said, her voice taking on a more solemn tone, "is the beginning of the project I spoke of. The Alari have a deep connection with emotion, an understanding of feelings that transcends what most species experience. But it is not something that can be easily explained." Caden frowned, confused. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, still unsure about what was happening. Professor Alvera turned to face him, her silver eyes locking onto his. There was a strange mixture of sadness and determination in her gaze. "This project requires more than just understanding the biology of species, Caden. It requires empathy. True empathy. To understand the evolution of species, you must understand their hearts, their fears, desires, and emotions. This will not only help you pass your exam, but it will change the way you see the universe." Caden's mind raced. Empathy? What did that even mean in terms of xenobiology? Was she asking him to feel what the alien species felt? To actually experience their emotions? The idea was overwhelming, but the professor's conviction left no room for doubt. There was more to this than just the exam. Professor Alvera stepped closer, her presence almost magnetic. "Are you ready to begin, Caden?" He hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision in his chest. But deep down, he knew there was no turning back. The intensity of the moment, the mystery of her offer, the unknown of what was to come, it all pulled him in. Caden nodded, finally able to speak, his voice steady but filled with a new kind of resolve. "Yes, Professor, I'm ready." Her lips curled into the slightest smile, and she led him to the pedestal, where the symbols began to shift and change with an almost imperceptible hum. "Then let us begin." The moment her hands touched the pedestal, Caden felt a sudden surge of energy pulse through the air, as if the room itself was coming alive. As Professor Alvera placed her hands on the pedestal, a soft hum filled the room, resonating deep in Caden's chest. It was as though the very walls were alive, their energy shifting and pulsing around him. He instinctively reached out, his hand trembling slightly, unsure of what was about to unfold. The moment his fingers brushed the cool surface of the pedestal, a wave of emotion washed over him, sudden and overpowering, as if the floodgates had opened. It wasn't just a sensation. It was a deep knowing, an overwhelming rush of understanding that connected him not only to the pedestal, but to everything around him. Caden gasped, stumbling slightly as the weight of the emotions surged through him. The images in his mind blurred, alien landscapes, the faces of beings he'd never met, and then the rush of emotions. Fear, hope, pain, and joy all at once, mingling in a chaotic dance. He felt the yearning of alien civilizations, the anguish of wars long fought, the quiet, steady pulse of life in species long forgotten. "What is this?" Caden whispered, his voice trembling as the images began to fade, replaced by a strange clarity. Professor Althra's voice, soft but commanding, echoed through the room, breaking the intense reverie. "This is what you must learn to understand. Caden." She spoke slowly, as though the weight of her words was not lost on him. "Empathy, true empathy, is not just an intellectual exercise. It is an emotional one. It requires you to feel what others feel, to live their struggles and triumphs as your own." Caden felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead, the images still lingering at the edges of his mind. He pulled his hand back from the pedestal, his heart racing as the emotions that had flooded him began to subside. He took a deep breath, trying to ground himself in reality. "Is this real?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Am I really experiencing their emotions, or is this just some kind of illusion?" Althra regarded him carefully, her silver eyes reflecting a depth of knowledge that made Caden feel like a mere child. "This is as real as it gets, Caden. The ritual is an ancient Alari practice, one that allows us to connect with the emotional essences of other beings, not through mere thought, but through direct, visceral experience. Through it, you will understand the true nature of the species you study, not just their biology, but the very core of their existence." Caden's mind was reeling. His understanding of the galaxy, of life itself, was being shattered and rebuilt in an instant. "But what about the exam?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "How does this help me pass?" Althra's lips curled into a small smile, though there was something guarded in her expression. "You cannot truly understand a species until you understand the emotions that drive them. Xenobiology is not just about cellular structures or evolutionary lines. It's about the stories behind them, the fear that drives a species to conquer, the love that bonds them together, the loss that shapes their history. This ritual will give you insight that no textbook can." Caden swallowed, trying to process her words. It felt like 1,000 questions were swirling in his mind, each one more pressing than the last. But one question stood out above the others. Why had she chosen him? He hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why me? Why did you offer this to me?" Althra's expression softened, but there was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes, something personal, vulnerable. "Because, Caden, you are different." Her gaze locked onto his, the weight of her words sinking in. "You see the world through a different lens. You are more empathetic than you realize. It is why you struggle with this subject. You do not just see the science, you feel the lives behind it." Her words hit Caden like a punch to the gut. He had always considered himself empathetic, but never in the way she was suggesting. Could it be true? Could he really feel the emotions of alien species, just as he felt his own? But this is too much, Caden said, shaking his head as the weight of the experience lingered. "I can't just connect to these beings like this. It's overwhelming." Althra stepped closer, her presence calming yet powerful. "It is meant to be overwhelming, Caden, but you are stronger than you think. Once you experience this, you will never see the galaxy the same way again." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Caden knew she was right. This was bigger than just passing an exam. This was about understanding, about connecting to something far beyond the human experience. He had signed up for a life of intellectual exploration, but this was something more. "Now, let's continue," Althra said, gesturing to the pedestal. "The ritual has only just begun." With a sense of determination, Caden nodded. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, But for the first time in weeks, he felt a strange sense of clarity. This project, whatever it was, wasn't just going to help him pass his exam. It was going to change him. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. Caden stepped forward, his heart still pounding from the emotional surge he had just experienced. The pedestal before him was now glowing more intensely, its symbols shifting and changing, as if responding to his presence. The air in the room felt thicker, charged with something deeper, a power he could barely comprehend, let alone control. "You ready to continue?" Professor Althera's voice was steady, her silver eyes watching him closely. Her calm demeanor seemed at odds with the overwhelming sensations Caden was still processing. She had an aura of confidence, as if she were entirely in control of the situation, but Caden couldn't help but wonder if she, too, felt some of the weight of the ritual. He nodded, his hand still trembling slightly as he placed it back on the pedestal, cautiously this time, as if unsure whether he could handle another wave of intense emotions. But as soon as his fingers made contact, the familiar flood of feelings rushed. Back this time, different, more vivid, more personal. It started with a sharp pang of grief, unlike anything he had ever felt. The vision that followed was like a flash of history, an alien city that had once thrived, now in ruins. The Theronians, a species Caden had read about, but never truly understood, stood amidst the wreckage, their faces filled with sorrow, but also determination. The grief was overwhelming, but it wasn't just sorrow for the loss of their city. It was a deep, soul-wrenching pain over the death of their people, their way of life. He could feel it, like a physical weight pressing against his chest. Caden's breath hitched, and he tried to pull his hand away, but it was as though an invisible force was holding him there, urging him to feel more, to understand more. "What is this?" Caden gasped, feeling like he was drowning in the emotions of a species that wasn't his own. He was inside their memories, experiencing their pain as if it were his own. "This is the beginning of your understanding, Caden." Althera's voice broke through the overwhelming sensations. "You are not just learning their biology. You are learning their soul. The pain you feel now is part of the Theronian downfall. It is what led them to their collapse, their inability to process and share grief, their isolation." Caden's hand remained on the pedestal, but now his fingers were clenched into a fist. He could feel their agony ripple through him, their memories intertwining with his own. It was a strange, disorienting experience, as though he was losing his sense of self. The feelings from the Theronians weren't just in his mind. They were in his heart, in his very being. He could hear their mournful cries, see the wreckage of their homes, and taste the bitterness of their regret. He gasped again, trying to shake off the sensations, but it was like trying to fight a tidal wave. He couldn't breathe properly, the emotions so dense that they seemed to suffocate him. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he felt like he might collapse under the weight of it all. "Caden, focus." Althera's voice came again, a little firmer now, though still filled with an odd calmness. "Do not try to fight it. Let it come. Let it pass through you. This is how you will learn to understand the species you study, by feeling what they have felt." The words didn't make it any easier, but they helped Caden find a tiny sliver of clarity. He focused on his breath, steadying it, trying to ground himself amidst the emotional storm. Slowly, the intensity of the grief began to recede, replaced by something else, something darker. This time, it was anger. The anger of a species wronged, a species determined to avenge their downfall. Caden felt the seething rage that had driven the Theronians to act in reckless ways, to lash out against the universe, to turn on their allies and their own people in a futile attempt to reclaim what they had lost. He could feel their resentment toward their own weakness, and toward the other species that had failed to help them when they needed it most. Caden's teeth clenched. His heart raced as he experienced the burning fury of an entire species. It was intoxicating, this raw, unfiltered emotion. It consumed him, blurred his thoughts, made him almost forget who he was. The pedestal pulsed beneath his hand, sending surges of energy through him, each one stronger than the last. His own emotions, his own human frustrations, mingled with the anger of the Theronians, creating an explosive mixture that felt like it was going to rip him apart. You are feeling the depth of their rage, Caden. Althara's voice broke through again, steady, grounding him. But this anger is destructive. This is why they fell. When a species loses control of their emotions, they become a danger not only to others, but to themselves. Caden tried to push the anger away, but it lingered, a dark cloud over his mind. He could still feel the Theronians' resentment like a burning flame in his chest. For a brief moment, he wondered how long he could last under this weight, how long he could endure the emotional flood before it consumed him completely. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the anger began to fade, replaced by something softer, regret. Caden's thoughts began to clear, and he realized that he wasn't just feeling the emotions of the Theronians anymore. He was beginning to understand them, to experience them in a way that was beyond simple academic learning. The regret that followed their downfall wasn't just about their lost power. It was about the loss of connection, the broken bonds between them and other species, the inability to reach out for help when they needed it most. Caden took a deep breath, letting the regret wash over him, allowing it to settle into the deeper recesses of his mind. For a long moment, he felt a strange sense of peace, like the calm after a storm. The flood of emotions had receded, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Now, Caden, do you understand? Althara's voice came softly, but there was a quiet satisfaction in it, as though she knew he had experienced something profound. This is how we learn. This is how you will pass your exam. Caden stepped back, his legs unsteady as he tried to process what had just happened. He had been through so much in the last few moments, so many emotions, so many lives, all flooding through him. He could barely catch his breath, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer the same person who had walked into this room. As he stood there, his hand still on the pedestal, Caden understood that this project wasn't just about passing the exam. It was about something deeper, something far more significant. It was about learning to feel the pulse of the universe, to understand the lives and experiences of those he had once viewed as distant and foreign. He wasn't just studying alien species anymore. He was becoming a part of them. And that, Caden realized, was the true lesson. Caden took a step back from the pedestal, his legs unsteady, as though the very ground beneath him had shifted. The flood of emotions still lingered, but there was a clarity in his mind now, a deeper understanding that hadn't been there before. He could still feel traces of the anger, the grief, the regret, but they were fading, replaced by something else, a kind of empathy he had never known. Professor. Althara watched him closely, her silver eyes studying his every movement. You are different now, Caden, she said, her voice almost approving. You have begun to see with more than just your mind. Caden blinked, trying to catch his breath as the intensity of the ritual started to dissipate. The emotions he had experienced felt like they were still swirling just beneath the surface, ready to burst out again. He couldn't shake the feeling that his perception of the galaxy had just shifted, that he had stepped into a new realm of understanding, one where the emotions of others were as real as his own. I feel so much, Caden said, his voice hoarse, struggling to articulate the overwhelming sensations. It's like I'm seeing everything differently. The species, their history, their emotions. It's all so much more real than I thought. Althara nodded, her expression unreadable. It is, Caden. The academic study of alien species is not enough to understand them. You must understand what drives them, what makes them feel. Only then can you truly understand their evolution, their rise, their fall. Only then will you understand why they do what they do. Caden stood there, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on his ability to think logically, to analyze and dissect data, to break things down into their basic components. But now, he was realizing that those cold, detached methods of learning were only half of the equation. The other half, the part that shaped history and civilization, lay in the emotions that guided them. He turned to face Aldera, his heart still racing. But why me, Professor? Why did you choose me for this? I'm just a student. I know. Different from anyone else. Althera's eyes softened, but there was a hint of something deeper in her gaze. You are different, Caden. You don't just see the world with your mind. You feel it. I sense that from the moment you stepped into my class. Your ability to empathize, to truly understand other species, is rare. I knew you could handle this project. It was the only way to get through to you. Caden felt a rush of warmth in his chest at her words, but it was quickly replaced by a feeling of uncertainty. But I didn't even know what I was agreeing to when I said yes. How do I know I can do this? How do I know I'm ready for what comes next? Aldera regarded him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Then she spoke, her voice low and steady. This is just the beginning, Caden. The journey ahead will not be easy. You will face challenges, emotional and intellectual. There will be moments when you will feel like you're drowning in the weight of it all. But remember, you are not alone. You have the strength within you to face this. And I will be here to guide you. Caden took a deep breath, nodding slowly. He wasn't sure if he believed her yet, but something in her words resonated with him. This was bigger than passing an exam. This was about understanding the universe in a way he never thought possible. The connections, the emotions, the histories. They were all woven together in a delicate, intricate web. And he was just starting to untangle it. Althera's gaze turned towards the pedestal again, and she stepped closer. Now that you have begun to feel what others feel, it's time for the next phase of the ritual. You must connect with the emotions of another species, one you've never encountered before. Caden raised an eyebrow. Another species? She nodded. Yes, you will feel the emotions of the Mraxians, a species that was once a great power in the galaxy, but whose downfall came at the hands of their own pride. Caden felt a shiver run down his spine at the mention of the Mraxians. He had read about them in his history classes. An advanced species once feared across the galaxy, but now lost to time and memory. The thought of connecting to their emotions, to feel their pride and downfall firsthand, was both thrilling and terrifying. What do I have to do? Caden asked, his voice low, unsure of what he was about to face. Aldera motioned to a large stone table at the center of the room. On it rested a glowing crystal, its surface shimmering with an iridescent light. Place your hands on the crystal and focus your mind. Let your emotions be open, vulnerable. Allow the Mraxians to connect with you. Let their history and their pain become yours. Caden swallowed, staring at the crystal. His pulse quickened, but he felt a strange sense of determination rise within him. He had come this far, he couldn't stop now. Slowly, he stepped forward and placed his hands on the crystal, his breath steady as he focused his mind. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, like a bolt of lightning, the Mraxian emotions surged through him, pride, anger, regret. Caden's vision blurred as the Mraxians' emotions flooded his senses. Their pride had once been their strength, but it had also been their downfall. He could feel their arrogance, their refusal to listen to the warnings of other species, their ultimate collapse as they tried to force their will on the galaxy. He felt the rage of their last battle, The anguish of their last moments as a civilization dot, it was overwhelming, like drowning in a sea of emotion. Caden's chest tightened, and he gasped for air, but he couldn't pull away. He had to feel it all. He had to understand it. The flood of emotions surged again, and just as he thought he might break under the weight of it, the feelings began to shift. Regret. The Mraxians had realized their mistake too late. The pride that had once defined them now lay in ruins. Caden felt their remorse, their desire to make amends, but it was too little, too late. Tears welled in Caden's eyes as he felt the Mraxians' pain, not just the pain of losing their empire, but the weight of knowing they had brought it upon themselves. He could feel it, deep in his soul, the crushing reality of their failure. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the emotions receded. The crystal before him dimmed, and Caden was left standing in the silence of the room, gasping for breath. His chest heaved, his body shaking as the weight of the experience settled over him. Alvara stepped forward, her voice calm. "You are beginning to understand, Caden. This is what it means to truly connect." Caden nodded, his mind still spinning from the emotional flood. I understand now." His voice trembled. "I understand what you meant. This is not just about biology. This is about something deeper." Allura smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened her usually stern expression. "Yes, Caden, and this understanding is what will help you pass your exam. But more importantly, it will change how you see the universe." As Caden stood there, still feeling the echoes of the Mraxian emotions inside him, he realized just how much this experience had altered him. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was part of the galaxy's emotional fabric, connected to beings he had never met, never understood. And he knew, deep down, that this journey had only just begun. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one a cascade of intense emotions, vivid memories, and moments of overwhelming connection. Caden couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer the same person who had first stepped into Professor Althera's classroom. His understanding of the universe had expanded in ways he hadn't thought possible. The rituals, the emotional bonds with species long gone, the shared pain and joy, it all intertwined in his mind like a complex web that he couldn't untangle. It wasn't just the study of alien species anymore. It was about understanding the very soul of the universe, feeling its pulse, its rise, its fall. The emotions that had passed through him, those of the Thyronians, the Mraxians, and others, had left lasting imprints. He could no longer look at any species, human or alien, without sensing their history, their struggles, and their deepest desires. But as much as he had learned, the weight of it all was beginning to take its toll. The final exam for xenobiology was only days away, and the tension Caden had been feeling since the first ritual was starting to mount. Althera's teachings had brought him to an entirely new level of understanding, but now he was facing a new challenge, the balance between his emotional connection to these species and the practical knowledge he needed to pass his exam. Evening, Caden found himself pacing in his dorm room, his mind racing. He could still feel the emotions of the Mraxians and the Thyronians pressing against the edges of his thoughts, each one vying for his attention. They were never fully gone. The weight of their experiences lingered with him, reminding him of the shared grief, the shared rage, the shared triumphs of civilizations long lost. But now, the real test lay before him. A knock on his door startled him. He hesitated, still lost in thought. Who could it be at this hour? He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door, and there stood Professor Alvera, her regal presence filling the doorway. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped in, her silver eyes piercing through him as always. There was something about her, something more than just her role as a professor. She seemed almost to carry the weight of the universe in her gaze. "You are struggling, Caden. she said quietly, but her voice held a gentle firmness that made it impossible to dismiss. I can feel it, Caden sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if I can do it, Professor. I understand more than I ever thought possible, but there's so much that I don't know how to explain. Althera studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting something Caden couldn't quite place. It was compassion, mixed with a certain kind of understanding. You've learned much, Caden, but you're trying to hold it all inside to keep it locked away. Caden looked down, frustrated. I don't know how to not hold it inside, Professor. These emotions, these memories, they're overwhelming. I can't focus on anything else. Althera nodded, stepping closer. You are holding on to their histories, Caden. Their pain, their loss. But you are not them. She paused, her gaze softening for the first time since their ritual began. You can feel what they felt, but you must also let go of it when the time comes. You are their student, but you are also a human. Your mind and heart are yours to govern. Do not lose yourself in the tides of others' lives. Caden took a slow breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The professor's words were like a lifeline, but he wasn't sure he could grasp them. How could he let go of what had become such a core part of him? The emotions were no longer just external. They had become a part of him, a new way of seeing the world. But how do I let go? Caden asked quietly, the weight of the question settling over him like a blanket. How do I focus on the exam when there's so much else? Althera's eyes softened, and for a moment, she didn't look like the poised, intimidating Professor Caden had come to know. She looked like someone who had lived through centuries of emotional turmoil, someone who had once struggled with the same balance he now faced. You will pass this exam, Caden, not just because of your knowledge, but because you understand. You understand what drives species, what makes them human, what makes them alien. You are ready for this. You just need to trust yourself. Her words struck something deep within him. She was right. He had to trust himself, not just his knowledge, but his gut instinct. The emotional connections he had formed with these species were not a weakness, they were a strength. He had learned more in a few weeks than he ever could have from a textbook. Now, it was time to use that understanding, to balance the empathy he had developed with the logical knowledge he had worked so hard to master. Professor, Althera smiled faintly as she turned to leave. I will see you at the exam, Caden. But remember, the universe doesn't just live in books and theories. It lives in emotions, in connections, in the stories we share. Caden nodded slowly as she left, the weight of her words settling heavily in his chest. The emotions, the histories, they were all part of something much bigger than himself. But in the end, it was his ability to connect those feelings with logic, with science, that would set him apart. He sat down at his desk and began reviewing the material once more. This time, however, it wasn't just about memorizing facts. It was about understanding the species he had studied, understanding their emotions, their motivations, their fallacies. Each alien species, each emotion they experienced, was now a part of the tapestry he was weaving. And in that moment, he knew he would pass. But more than that, Caden knew that this was only the beginning. The exam would come, but it was the knowledge of empathy, of human connection, that would truly shape him in ways no textbook ever could. And perhaps, he thought as he looked out at the stars beyond his window, he wasn't just studying to pass a course. He was learning how to live in a galaxy filled with more than just knowledge. A galaxy full of emotions, experiences, and life, and he was ready for it. The day of the final exam arrived far sooner than Caden had anticipated. As the sun set over the distant planetary horizon, the massive spires of the Galactic University of Traxxas cast long shadows across the campus, and Caden found himself walking toward the exam hall with a mixture of calm determination and mounting anticipation. It wasn't the fear of failing that gripped him now, but something deeper, the understanding that this was more than just an exam. It was the culmination of everything he had learned about himself, about the universe and beyond. Emotions that bound everything together. His steps echoed in the quiet corridors of the university as he made his way to the hall. He had gone over the material a dozen times, but this time it wasn't the facts he focused on. It wasn't about memorizing alien species' biological structures or the complex evolutionary lines. No, it was about understanding their stories, their emotions, what made them tick, what drove them to greatness or to ruin. He felt a quiet sense of confidence, the kind he had never had before. The ritual with Professor Alvira, the overwhelming flood of emotions, had not only changed the way he viewed the galaxy, but also the way he saw himself. As he entered the exam hall, he immediately spotted Professor Alvira sitting at the front of the room, her silver eyes scanning the room with quiet intensity. The Alari professor had always been an imposing figure in her own right, but today, there was a subtle change in her demeanor, a flicker of something unspoken between them. Perhaps she, too, could sense the shift in him. There was no longer any fear, no uncertainty. Caden knew he was ready. The rest of the students filed in, and Caden took a seat near the front, facing the exam terminal. A hum of anticipation filled the room as the students settled in, all of them fidgeting nervously, glancing over their notes one last time. Caden, however, remained calm, his mind clear. He had come to understand something fundamental about his role as a student. It wasn't just about learning from the texts or the lectures. It was about learning to feel, to connect with the very essence of the species and histories he studied. Professor Alvira stood up, her commanding presence filling the room, and as she spoke, Caden noticed the subtle warmth in her voice. Welcome to the final exam for Xenobiology 301. This is not just a test of your knowledge of alien biology. This is a test of your ability to understand the beings you have studied, to connect with them. Her eyes flicked toward Caden for a brief moment, and he felt a slight weight in her gaze, but there was no fear in him. Only focus. You will be asked to answer questions about various species, their biology, their culture, and their emotional dynamics. But I want you to remember one thing. Your understanding is not based on facts alone. It is based on your ability to empathize with them, to feel what they felt, and to comprehend the choices they made. The exam terminal in front of Caden flickered to life, and a series of questions appeared on the screen. But as he stared at them, he realized something. The questions weren't just asking about facts, they were probing his empathy, his insight, into the species' history and struggles. The first question appeared. The Araxians were a peaceful species before their destruction. What emotions led to their fall, and how did their understanding of peace ultimately lead to their undoing? Caden closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories flood back. He remembered the Araxians' loss, their over-reliance on isolationism, the way they cut themselves off from the rest of the galaxy, believing that peace was something that could only be achieved in solitude. But their belief in peace had turned to arrogance, and eventually to complacency. He could feel it, the self-righteousness of the Araxians, the way they thought they could separate themselves from the struggles of other species, believing they were above the chaos of the universe. But their downfall was inevitable. Their isolation made them vulnerable to those who sought power. Caden could feel their regret, the pain of realizing too late that peace was not just a passive state. It was something that had to be maintained, something that required active engagement with others. Caden typed his answer confidently, explaining the emotional undercurrents that led to the Araxians' destruction, their self-imposed isolation, and the pride that came with it. The answer felt right, not because it was technically perfect, but because it resonated with him emotionally. The next question appeared, and this time it was about the Xenacrians, a warlike species with a long history of intergalactic conflict. Xenacrians are known for their brutality and the constant wars they waged. What emotions fueled their endless battle for dominance? And how did their emotional state shape their aggressive nature? This one was different. The Xenacrians were driven by a deep sense of fear. Fear of weakness. Fear of being overrun by other species. They had grown up in a galaxy where only the strong survived, where power was the only language that made sense. Caden could almost feel their constant anxiety, their need for control, and their ever-present fear that they would lose their place in the galaxy. The Xenacrian aggression wasn't born from malice. It was born from survival. They were afraid of everything, losing power, losing their people, losing their identity. And it was this fear that led them to fight wars, to expand their empire, to dominate others in order to control their own fate. As Caden typed out his answer, he could sense the deep-rooted insecurity that the Xenacrians carried, their constant need for validation from others, their fear of being seen as weak. The emotion was raw, and he found it easier to understand than he had anticipated. With each question that followed, Caden's confidence grew. The final exam was not just about the factual knowledge he had gained in Althera's class. It was about feeling the species' histories, understanding the emotional roots of their actions, and using that understanding to weave his answers into something far more complex than mere academic answers. The questions asked him to connect, to dive deep into the soul of the species, to sense the emotions that had driven them, whether it was fear, grief, ambition, or love. As the exam concluded, Caden sat back in his chair, exhausted but oddly satisfied. He had done more than answer questions. He had shared in the emotional history of the galaxy. The weight of his understanding was profound, but he knew that it was what he had been meant to learn all along. Professor Althera walked toward him, her steps silent on the floor. She stopped beside his desk, her silver eyes scanning his face for any sign of uncertainty. There was none. "Well done, Caden," she said, her voice warm with approval. "You have not only passed the exam, but you have truly understood what it means to study the galaxy, to feel it, to live it." Caden smiled, though he was still reeling from the intensity of the experience. "Thank you, Professor, for everything." As the other students began to file out, Althera paused at the door, her expression serious. "This is just the beginning, Caden. The galaxy is full of emotion, full of stories that have yet to be told. You have seen a glimpse of it. Now it is up to you to continue learning." Caden nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose settle over him. He had passed the exam, yes, but more importantly, he had begun to understand the soul of the universe. And he knew that the journey ahead, the one that stretched far beyond the walls of the university, would be one of constant discovery, a discovery of emotions, of history, and of the connections that tied all beings together. He was ready for it.